Hello and welcome today to the Christian Construction Podcast. We want you to stay tuned for this important episode concerning biblical restitution. All right, well, it's good to be back here on the podcast again today with you gentlemen. It's been a while.
It has been. It has been.
I love how you said this important episode.
It is
you
important.
Really made me feel.
Well, it's important
to be
because
here.
It was your idea. And,
it was.
And it makes it even more
I
important.
thought that would make it less important.
It makes it more important because you're here. So
What a
it's
sweetheart.
been a long time. I
It's
mean,
been a while.
I
I'm
feel
just
like
glad.
I just watched a
Me
commercial.
and Keith got replaced there for a
Well,
little while.
you know, if y'all would quit coming down with the coronavirus, then no, I'm kidding.
You know about something I don't know
Wow,
about.
spread that little rumor around. Did y'all
Oh,
hear?
boy.
Matt Panther and Keith Norman. Tell it everywhere you go. No.
I hadn't been drawing enough unemployment if I got the coronavirus.
Yeah, if I got it, I better be getting something for it.
That's right.
I've had to be at work way too early in the morning, you know.
The government hadn't told me I have coronavirus yet.
Once they tell you, you do, then you got it. Oh
They
man,
hadn't tallied me up with the rest of them.
Brother Keith, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How you doing?
Doing well, surviving all this craziness.
Saturated. We are surviving the sickness, but we're saturated in the meantime.
Now the economy's really, really bad right now. You work at a building yard. Y'all build trusses and constantly putting out wood, lumber, material, stuff like that. Can you tell that the economy's took a turn down right now?
I couldn't to start with. Right, I guess when the news first started coming out, we stayed pretty strong. We stayed pretty busy over the past 3 weeks. They've been giving us days off. They really anything short of 40 hours is the normal, and I'm used to working between 60 and 70. So
Wow.
it's a big hit
You
as
still
far as
getting
that's
overtime?
concerned.
Though.
Well,
That's pretty good.
No.
No?
I'm
Not as
getting 38 for 3 weeks.
Brother Matt, you do some work. You've done a bunch of different types of things, but I mean, you do all kinds of stuff.
Can't hold a job.
But you work in a manufacturing that yours is kind of what you're doing is kind of different. Like y'all do coating on wires and stuff like that. So I guess it's probably hard to tell whether or not the economy's doing good by how y'all's business. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, all of ours is subcontract, so
So
about the only way you can tell is if somebody says we don't need any more, roofing tape or, Brother Keith's talking about building the trusses. I guess that kind of correlates together. We make the tape people walk on to lay their shingles
Lay
down.
their shingles
and
down.
that's cut out, but we also make icy hot pads, and people need them.
y'all make all kinds of stuff. Well, as far as I can tell, I've been kind of watching in my journeys and travels, and I just be
I'm
honest with you.
guessing yours has slowed down.
Well,
a lot.
I'm just going to tell you, this thing is getting bad, and if it gets too much worse, we won't be able to find a parking spot at Walmart. People talk about it being a recession, but yet you can't get into parking lot at Lowe's, at Walmart, and the economy. I know there's going to be some effects other than that, but as long as the government's giving out stimulus checks and all that crazy stuff, and people's got $600 extra a week on unemployment, they're going to go out there and spend it.
That's right.
And that is exactly what they're doing. So I can't hardly tell anything right now as far as the economy goes. But anyway, at the time of this recording, it looks like we're still practicing a lot of social distancing and safety precautions, but it looks like we're close to going back in our sanctuary.
We're
Wait,
panoramic.
we're not.
If you can't tell on this camera angle, we are 6 feet apart.
Well, this should have been an audio only episode. So we're kind of at the end of this thing. It looks like that we're fixing to go back in the sanctuary, and the Lord has really been good to us as far as helping us have good services, and we've got a good setup here at the church. However, we do know that every church is possibly doing something different, and
Doing their best.
I think I had a. I can't remember if it was us that did the episode about the coronavirus. Didn't we do one about that a while back?
We did.
And I know what we were doing might be different than what somebody else is doing, but, we're for every pastor doing whatever they felt like is best for their congregation. Right. And so we thank the Lord for giving wisdom and helping us get through all of this.
Something I've noticed throughout this, and you see it a lot, especially on social media.
What's that?
Everybody's going to think the pastor's doing too little. Somebody's going to think he's doing too much. Somebody's going to think he's, not taking it serious enough. Somebody's going to think that
everybody's got to
kind of just roll with whatever the pastor says.
And most of them people, it's amazing that God didn't call them to pastor.
They let everybody know about it, that's for sure.
Well, we're talking today. This is a subject that it might be sensitive to some. If you are in the ministry, it will be sensitive to you, because one of the things that I learned a long time ago was that the two words that I would say the most in the ministry would be, "I'm sorry." And in the years of being in the ministry, doing ministry work, I have found that to be true. It seems like, that's one of the things that's hard for people to do. Sometimes, as far as the ministry goes, we do it for the sake of the ministry. There have been times when I have admitted, not admitted I'd done wrong, but have maybe apologized for something that maybe I wasn't as guilty as someone would have liked for me to be, but I've said I'm sorry to try to make it better and try to make the best out of a bad situation. And there's times when in our lives we're going to take ownership for things just to keep the peace, not to compromise, not so that somebody can have their way, but there are times when maybe it's someone who's weak, maybe it's someone who they don't understand, and we bite the bullet for the sake of helping salvage that person or salvaging a relationship, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a marriage, whether it's between a parent and a child. There are times when we all, at some point in our life, will say, "I'm sorry" for things that we maybe truly didn't feel like we had, really done that bad. And so what we want to talk about today is biblical restitution, making things right when someone has done you wrong or when you have done someone wrong. What is it? What are the steps that a person goes to try to make things right? And I want to start by reading just a couple of verses of Scripture. Luke chapter 17 and verse number 1, Jesus said this to his disciples. He said, "It is impossible, but that offenses will come." Now, I'm not much for just reading half or parts of verses and taking it out of context. You men know that. If you read the remainder of this, that the phrase that I'm lifting out, it doesn't change the story, all right? It doesn't change the context if I continue to read. The point I'm wanting to make with this half of a verse that I've just read is that Jesus said it. Offenses will come. There are going to be times when you do wrong, and how you respond to that and try to make it right determines you moving forward in your Christian life.
Sure.
There are going to be times when you get done wrong. And again, how you respond to that, how you let that affect you, your reactions to those things, your retaliation to those things, all of that will determine whether or not you continue to move forward spiritually and whether or not God gets the glory in all of that. And so, first of all, let's let it be known, offenses will come. And then I want to go to Matthew chapter number 18. I was going to go to Leviticus chapter 6. There's some Old Testament principles there. But first of all, we want to start by just simply saying, dealing with the subject of an offense. An offense, all right? We'll talk about both sides of that offense in just a minute. But Matthew chapter number 18 and verse number 21, the Bible says, "Then came Peter to him," talking about Jesus, "and said, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Till 7 times? Jesus saith unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. Now we know that Jesus, I don't think he literally meant once you've made it, let him make that right 490 times, and you don't have to forgive him anymore. Jesus is throwing a ridiculous number out there so that Peter and the disciples would realize, okay, there's not a time when I don't forgive. There's not a time when I don't let somebody make things right. And so in the area of these offenses and all of this, they're going to happen. These offenses are going to happen. That's stated in Luke 17. Then Jesus says, you can forgive people. And we're going to possibly talk about the difference between forgiveness and restoration or restitution. But forgiveness should always be available. Jesus died on the cross, granted or asked for forgiveness for those people that were around him. As far as the subject of offenses goes, let me just say this, and then we'll talk about it for a minute. You have an offense, you have the offender, or you have an offense, you have the offended, and then we have the offender. And we're going to look at all three of those. As far as the offense goes, if you remove the sin, you remove the problem. I don't know about you, men, but there have been times in my life when I've been on either side of that, and I have thought, if I hadn't done, or if they just hadn't done, then there wouldn't be a problem. There wouldn't be an issue. So the fact is that there are offenses, but if you remove that sin, if you remove that issue, there's no apology for me to give, and there's no apology that I have to receive. If you just take that out of the equation. So I don't know if y'all want to comment on that or say something. Throw some of them golden nuggets down.
I was just going to say, pastor's my favorite quoter, and one of the statements that he's made. At the heart of every problem is a problem of the heart, and I think about some conflicts that I may have had with a brother in Christ, and a lot of times would not have existed without some. And if you look and examine yourself after the fact, hindsight's 20/20, you realize that there was some pride, some self-pride involved. There was some part of not feeling like you didn't get treated like you ought to feel like you ought to have is pride.
It is,
I didn't get treated right by my eyes. So that's a form of pride in our lives.
Sure.
And that's a conflict, that's a problem of the heart. And if we take those problems and look at ourselves, examine ourselves and fix the problems in ourselves, then it solves the problems between brothers.
That's right. Brother Matt, any comments on that as far as that goes?
No, I agree 100%. I think there's been, in my own life, there's been times that I've done wrong that I think, man, I wish I just wouldn't have done that. There's also been times that I might have not even seen it as an issue, even after the accusation, was brought forth. But even then, I can look and say, I just wish I wouldn't have done it, whether it was wrong, whether I should have or shouldn't have. I just wish I wouldn't, because this would have never happened. I think that goes back to sometimes you just got to use your better judgment. Whether it's going to be right or whether it's going to be wrong, is it going to be right? Whether it's going to be sin, is it going to benefit you in any way?
Right.
Whether it's going to be wrong in your own eyes, is it going to be right in everybody else's? And I think that's we talk a lot of time about appearance, and we say, well, God looks upon the heart. Well, that's true, but I see Michael Lindsay.
That's
I
right.
see your face. I
That's
see
right.
your clothes. I see your actions.
Yep.
People see Matt Panther. They see what I look like, what things I do, the things that I say. And whether or not I think what I'm doing is wrong, if somebody else does, then, it's wrong. Don't do it. And, it'll save a lot of regret. I think of, my dad went to Tabernacle under Dr. Seitler, and I remember my whole life he preached to me what Dr. Seitler preached to them is don't judge yourself in the eyes of yourself, but judge yourself in the eyes of those that you want to respect.
Well, that's good.
Want their
That's
respect. Good. And won't be too long until you earn that, until you'll gain it.
You just made mention of it. There are times when we do things that may not be wrong,
Right.
but we offend somebody in doing
Yep.
it. We might be 100% completely right, but we've offended somebody. Paul gives us a situation where he said, if I eat meat, but it offends my brother, then I'll abstain from that. I'm not going to do that. And what he's talking about is not that it's wrong for him to do that, but he's saying this person that's seeing me do that, they don't understand. They're not going to give me the benefit of the doubt. They're not mature enough in the Lord. They don't know they don't know why it's okay for me to do this. All they know is, hey, that looks like something that's wrong. You just said it, the appearance of evil. There are times in our life, and especially in the ministry, when it might be okay for you to do something, but because of the appearance of it to either a weak Christian or a young, immature Christian, it might not be such a good thing, for us,
Right.
especially as men of God, to do that. And of course, that's good advice for any Christian,
I think when I was a kid, I remember my dad, there was things that he wouldn't allow us to do or places he wouldn't allow us to go, things that he might, or even things that he might not allow us to see or listen, whatever it is. Y'all know what I'm saying.
Right.
That he would tell us that his reasoning was simply not that he thought it was wrong, not that he had an issue with it, but that a preacher that he respected, a preacher that he thought highly of, or somebody in the church might have had an issue with it. My dad was a pastor. His reasoning for not allowing us to do that was so nobody else could say, well, I'm not going to listen to him preach. I don't want him.
Right.
I don't want to hear what he has to say, because he lets his family do this. They go here, they do that. And that's something that stuck with me my whole life, whatever I think on the matter or think on the subject, it really doesn't matter, because my goal in being here, the ultimate reason that I'm still here today is to be a witness, to be a light
Sure.
in a lost and dying world, and whatever I can do to not be a stumbling block, to not be a hindrance, we need to do.
That was what Paul referred to it as.
Right.
When we, something that might not be wrong for us to do it, but because you got a weaker weak brethren, it could be a stumbling block to them. So we've kind of looked at the offense. Now let's look at the offended, the one who has been done wrong. First of all, if somebody's ever done you wrong, what you always want to be careful of is your reaction. You want to make sure that your reaction is not a spiteful reaction. It's not an action that's done in retaliation, but it's a reaction that's spiritual and that's scriptural. And there is a spiritual and scriptural reaction. Somebody once said, the test of a man's spirituality is not in his action, it's in his reaction. And so there's a lot of truth to that. I don't know if that holds completely true, but there is a lot of truth to that. Paul said in the book of Galatians chapter 6, verse 1, to the person who has been offended or the one that's been done wrong, he says, brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual. Now, this could be the one who's been done wrong, or it could be somebody who has watched as someone has done others wrong, and we're just standing back looking at it. Ye which are spiritual, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. I think it's important to, and you hear the world say stuff like this, but this actually comes from God. You hear people say stuff like, well, one of these days it's going to happen to you. It's going to happen to you. And while that is usually said with the wrong spirit and with the wrong attitude, the reality of it is, in Galatians 6:1, God said that.
Yeah.
He said, consider yourself. And I think what you just made mention of, don't look at it through the eyes of what you want it to be. Look at it through the eyes of the way others see it. And in this case, you're going to don't just take the way that you see it, but put yourself in his shoes as if, what if you were that one? What if you were the one who had messed up? What if you were the one who had made the mistake? Verse 2 says, bear you one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. You could go through this whole thing, and one of the things I like that is in verse number 10 of this same chapter. In the context, this is talking about restitution of a fallen brother. And he says this, as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith. Now, what that don't say is, let them off the hook, turn your head at sin, act like it didn't happen. That's not what it says. But it does say, as we have opportunity, do good, especially unto them who are of the household of faith. In other words, it could be a preacher, it could be a fellow church member, it could be someone out of a youth group, it could be one of your peers. It doesn't matter. Consider yourself, and then try to win them back. Consider yourself, do good unto them. Don't give them a free pass and a license to sin, but reach out to them. Show them that, hey, I'll help you. What can I do to help you get right? What can I do to help you, get back? We've all seen somebody who is the one, who messed up. But us who are the bystanders or the ones who got done wrong, we have the power. It's in our hands to maybe help that person to where they can get back, where they need to be at. Let's go from talking about the offense to the offended, to the offender. The one, and that's really what the thrust of this episode is about, the one who has done wrong. Obviously, if someone has done you wrong, there's a right way to go about getting right with them, and we could dive into Matthew 18 there. It talks about how you go to that person. And you ought to. Don't go around telling everybody else. If you tell anybody else, it ought to be going to the pastor.
Sure.
Obviously that's the right. That's never a bad thing to do. Your pastor, if he's any kind of a pastor, he's not going to go around telling everybody else. He's going to keep it in confidence between you and him. He's going to give you the right advice how to go about making it right. With that person.
One of the things when you was talking about the offended, one of the things even I have struggled with, and I think it's our flesh. We find it so easy to want to. We have a way that we feel about the situation, or a way that we feel about a person, and instead of going to that person or going to the pastor with it, we want somebody to join us and have this same mentality of that person. Yeah. And then you have this problem that was just between one person and another. That has now become a bigger problem that has to be dealt with in a bigger way.
And that's one of the keys is when somebody has done you wrong, exactly what you said. Don't drag somebody else, because all you've done then is you've magnified the problem.
Why it's important for the offended to respond right, as is the offender. The offender can do the same thing. He can go around and say, "This is what this person has done." And he's trying to pull somebody to feel a certain way about a person when
to justify his wrong.
Right.
So as the offended, don't just pull people in. Talk to your pastor, then go to that person. Follow the biblical steps. If you don't know what those are, go to Matthew 18. There's some good biblical advice Jesus give us about that. And then if nothing else, talk to your pastor, because this is true too. Every situation is different. You don't have to make a bigger deal out of something. It might be something small. Somebody beat you out of $5. All right, well, there ain't no sense in shutting down a business meeting at church or something, and
church split.
Fixing to dismiss service. Pastor, I got something on my heart. That's not the time to do that. So if you are the one who has been done wrong, talk to your pastor. And in most cases, it don't really require that, unless it's just one of those situations. But go to that person with the spirit of meekness. Ain't that what Galatians 6 says? Go in the spirit of meekness. Try to restore them. And consider yourself, what if it was me? What if I was the one who had done that? I would want somebody to have some mercy on me and then give me some grace and give me a space for repentance, We're getting down to the end here. We dwelled on that a little too long. That's my fault. But we talked about the offense and the offended. Now let's talk about the offender, the one that has done wrong. Just some words of advice. First of all, when we have sin between us and God, then that's the only person we have to get right with is God, right? But when I have done something to hurt you, I not only have to get right with God, I've got to get right with you. And in the same sense, me just getting right with you doesn't make me right with God. I've got to get right with you and get right with God. And so if we're going to get right, if we're going to have restitution, it's not just getting right this way, it's getting right this way too. And then also, the dealing with it is going to have to be direct. If you have done wrong, you can't kind of beat around the bush about it. We've all been in a situation.
I'm sorry, but
justifying what we done wrong. You just said it a minute ago, trying to pull somebody and say, I done this wrong, but you know what they done to me? And that is not getting right. That's not what getting right is. Getting right is, I'm sorry, and even in some cases, it's worth taking the blame plus some to make it right. Because let's just be honest, the whole situation wouldn't have got to what it is. I know of a guy that was a dear friend of mine, and he done really bad wrong, And when it come time to get right, I'm not going to name no names. When it come time to get right, and he went to his pastor to make it right, the pastor said, "You're to blame for this whole thing blowing up and getting as bad as it got." And he refused. He refused. "No, I didn't do all that. I'm not taking the blame for that." Well, now, wait a second. If you take this initial sin out of the equation, then you can take everything else away. And so oftentimes when we go to get right, we may have to take the blame for more than what we actually did in order to truly make it right. So our apologies need to be direct. They need to be measured. When my children, I know this might be elementary, when I'm dealing with my children, there are times, I know people don't believe this, but my children get crossed up with each other. And they have to apologize. Hourly, momently. And when they do, it's not just enough, in my opinion, for them to say, "I'm sorry." I want them to say, "I'm sorry," and to explain what they're sorry for two reasons. Number one, to humble them so that they will have to be specific about it. And number two, so that they will understand this is exactly what you did wrong. And this is what I did wrong, and this is what I am apologizing for because I did wrong when I did ABC, right? And so they need to be direct and measurable. And then just me going to you and apologizing, and I kind of halfway covered this, just me going to you and apologizing does not equal repentance. Right. You can apologize, but if I turn around and do it to you again next week and then come back and apologize, that's modern Christianity, 1 John 1:9. As long as we repeat that, then, we're good to go. So what's some advice you could give, Brother Matt, to the one who is the offender, the one who has done wrong? What's some good advice you would give them?
I would say, I've not always done this, but the times that I have, I believe it's benefited me and helped me out of the situation that I put myself in. Right. And that's not to simply accept the consequence, but accept the consequence and go beyond what the consequence is.
Right.
Whether you got to lose this, whether you're not benefited as much as you thought you would be. Don't just do that. Go ahead and go the extra step.
The extra mile.
Make sure that the one that is offended knows, hey, they're really sorry. Yeah. Because we've heard it our whole life. Talk's cheap. Yeah. I'm sorry is a cheap statement. But it can be very rich. Sure. If you prove it to be rich, if you put something behind it, if you back it up with something, it's real easy to say, "I'm sorry," and grudgingly go about what needs to be done to fix the circumstance. But so how much better situations can be if you say, "Look, I'm sorry. I want to do this and this and this to make it right." A lot of times, it might really help if you don't even ask for, if you set the consequence for yourself.
Right.
Say, a lot of times nobody's going to ask for it. Nobody's going to say, "I'm sorry," and kind of just expect it to wash over. Whoever's offended might not feel like they can ask for something to be made right, and they get put in a position where they feel like, "Well, I just kind of got to forget about it. I'm still a little lost, but, he said he's sorry, so it's not right for me to hold a grudge anymore." So it might be up to that person that's made the mistake. If I'm at fault with Brother Keith here, it might be my responsibility. Brother Keith might not feel like he can ask me to do something, but to go ahead and say, "Look, I'm going to do this, this, and this to make it right. And if there's anything else that you need, if there's any other thing anything else I can do to make this situation better, tell me, because I want it to be right."
Under the Old Testament law, when they made things right, and we could go to Leviticus and talk about this, and this is the Old Testament law. This is what they had to do to make it right. Moses didn't tell them what to do. The priest didn't make a judgment decision. There was a law in place that if you did this, then you had to do this to prove to them that you were. And it was part of what you were saying. They were going above and beyond to make it completely right with them.
Zacchaeus.
Right. Yes. Zacchaeus is a great example of that. And so, are these have-tos? No, there's no word that says you've got to go above and beyond. But if you truly want to prove And that's what you want to do. You want to prove that you really mean it. So what's the harm in doing that? Brother Keith, you got some thoughts on that?
The only closing statements really quick. Just to be clear, it is not right for anybody to want to offend, and I know that we're talking about biblical restitution, but we're not trying to defend the offended either. We're a message our pastor preaches out of the danger of being offended. And Jesus, spit on the ground and made clay and wiped it on a man's eyes, and pastor talks about how it's the most derogatory, most offensive thing that somebody could have done in those days, and it would have been easy for that man to be offended. But if he'd have got offended, he'd have missed the biggest blessing of his life.
That's right.
So we're not trying to defend the offender or the offended. It is just as dangerous to be offended. So deal with it. Be straightforward with the offender if you are offended. You want to get any offense between your brother, you want to get it taken care of.
That's right.
Because those things that are not dealt with, I can't talk to God if I've got a fault with a brother.
That's
and
right.
our mind works in ways that make everything a lot bigger than they really are. And the longer you let it steam, the bigger it gets. The
bigger it builds.
And we all have stories from our own lives. We all got stories from people that we know. Something so little and so silly turns into quit talking to people, leaving church, and everything else.
My advice would be to the one who is the offender. You've done something wrong. Be honest. Don't be prideful. If you've done it, own up to it and admit it, and try to get right with the people or the person that you've done wrong. Get pride out of the way. At the center of every sin is pride. In some form, some capacity. Pride is there in the middle of every sin. And so to the offender, be honest, own up to it. To the one who's been offended, let somebody get right with you. Don't be so hard that I don't think they really meant it, or I don't like it, or they didn't cry enough, or no, you accept it. It's not up to you to judge how much you thought they really got right. It's up to you to accept it. Now, if I give you my wallet and I told you to hold it for me, I'm coming back next week to get it, and I come back and there's a lot of money missing, you come and apologize to me, I'll forgive you, but I'm not going to let you hold my wallet again for a week. And so forgiveness and restoration, we don't have time to get into all that. Forgiveness and total restoration are two different things. But Jesus, when he was dying on the cross, obviously the greatest example, the author and finisher of our faith, he forgave those people. He asked God to forgive those people. He was willing to do that. And I believe with every sinner, forgiveness is extended. It's just a matter of folks receiving that and accepting the forgiveness that Christ offers them, or that God offers them through what Christ done. Ephesians 4:32 says, be ye kind, tenderhearted one to another, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake have forgiven you. And so be willing to say, I'm sorry. And then to the one who's been done wrong, be willing to let somebody make it right with you. And so anyway, that is our episode for the day. Biblical restitution. Get right. If you're not right with somebody, go get right with them. If somebody's done you wrong, why don't you be the bigger one? Go to them. If they've been overtaken in a fault, go to them. Try to help them. And it may be that you've went to them and done all you can do to try to help them get right. Not in a condescending way, but to let them know you're there for them. And if they don't want to get right, there's nothing you can do to make them get right. But the peace of knowing that you have done what you can do is worth it to try to help somebody get where they need to be with the Lord. So that's our episode for the day. We appreciate you tuning in, and we hope that you will continue to tune in here on the Christian Construction Podcast.